Anyway, it's great to be here. I guess I'll chat a little bit about Blue Ridge, sort of where we see social innovation and sort of how I got to be here, and then we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, sort of ideas you're thinking about, or the field, or careers, or anything you're kind of interested in. Yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is I think it's a very exciting time to be doing what you're doing and thinking about social innovation. It's like a golden age. It's, information spreads so much more rapidly now. So good ideas can get surfaced and spread so quickly. The methodologies of design thinking and listening to beneficiaries and putting yourselves in other people's shoes in order to create products and solutions is gaining incredible currency, and yet there's still not enough talent out there who's really versed in those methodologies. So there's big opportunity to create things that are meaningful. And then I think there's just a huge demand for talent. So social innovation, I don't think, requires you to start something or do a new thing. It can, you can have an incredibly impactful role and career at a place by helping the place be better, do more, be more responsive. So I think it's an incredible time, and I think the program here is sort of right in the midst of all these impressive and important trends. And I also think there's a lot of challenges for us still to work through in social innovation. One of them being thinking about sort of the financing mechanisms. There's the funding streams are not necessarily set up to support like iteration and learning and failing fast and all those kinds of things. That's not the mentality yet of institutional philanthropy or certainly government. And so there's a challenge to figure out how do these new methodologies match up with the kind of support that they need to have the runway to work over time. I think we still are struggling, or it's an ongoing conversation about what do we mean by impact. Sort of what is social impact, what's meaningful impact. If something can scale and go worldwide, does that mean that it's huge impact, or do we have to look at how deep a change is created for someone in their life? And then much related to that is thinking about, even as we're in this sort of amazing dawn of ideas springing up and new technologies and a much smaller globe, are the macro trends kind of going in the way that we want? So if we, Blue Ridge focused very much on the United States domestically, and there, we've seen income inequality grow, sort of the core value of the United States be threatened in terms of where you start out, not dictating where you end up. So even as we're in the midst of all these entrepreneurial ideas and new kinds of entrepreneurship spirit and the new possibilities of technology, does it all add up to get us in the direction that we want to go? And I think that has to be asked for whatever kind of social issue you're thinking about and working on. So it's very exciting, lots of buzz, lots of jargon, increasing amounts of press. But I think the onus is on us to think about what does it really mean to have impact. How do we think about that in sort of the work that we're doing, and making sure we're not getting caught up in kind of the latest buzz of the field. So, Blue Ridge's contribution to that, I can talk a little bit about. We've been around for about 10 years. We started in the first wave of technology incubators when they were big, and Idea Lab and e-companies were sort of in the first internet bubble wave. And we looked around and said, that kind of heavy support for early stage organizations is something that nonprofits could benefit a great deal from. I had, and I can talk a little bit about my background, but I had gotten an Echo and Green fellowship, and so Echo and Green, amazing institution that supports early stage social entrepreneurs, had really opened a bunch of doors for me in terms of networks and connections, and so was the inspiration as a model. But it was also very spread out and diffuse, and so we were thinking, how could we take some of the issues around technical assistance and management support and tight network and combine it with this incubator model and bring it all together and support startup nonprofits. So we started about 10 years ago, first with an idea that was conceptualized by John Griffin, who's the founder of Blue Ridge Foundation New York, who runs Blue Ridge Capital, which is a hedge fund in the city. And he had been emailing young people because of his philanthropy work. And he was this was in like '99 when email was still relatively new. And John felt like here he was, someone who wouldn't sign up necessarily to be a mentor where you come someplace every week. But he was seeing that kids were opening up on email in ways that they weren't even opening up in person. And so he said, this should be bigger, there should be something to this idea. And so we spent the first couple of years of Blue Ridge being in existence working on something that became iMentor, which is now serving thousands of pairs in New York City and thousands more across the country, focused on using in-person and online relationships to help young people get to and through college. So we spent a couple of years working on iMentor and then started to incubate new ideas out of a Brooklyn loft and have been at it ever since, doing some things that have been ideas from scratch and some things where if there's been an organization operating in other cities that wanted to come to New York, we'd help launch their local office in New York City. And thematically, we've always been focused on upward mobility in the United States, so looking at youth development, education, job training, criminal justice kinds of models. But we haven't been necessarily focused on technology. iMentor had a technology component, but not all the organizations that we supported have. But we recently, in the last year, sort of made the determination that we wanted to focus on ideas that have technology and data at their core. Sort of one of these major trends, technology is disrupting every industry. There's ideas out there about how to use technology for good that we believe will come to us, particularly from digital natives, folks who grew up sort of with Google and email and everything else as second nature. And so as folks are thinking about how are they going to create change in the world, they're going to naturally be thinking about how to leverage technology to do it. And so we wanted to give folks a runway to be able to do that. So we're focused on early stage, seed stage, technology-based social innovations. And then as a result of focusing on tech, we saw a lot of folks organizing their companies to achieve their social mission, not as nonprofits, but as for-profits, like through educational technology or tools to support underbanked and that kind of thing. And so we become agnostic and are supporting for-profits as well as nonprofits as long as they're tightly aligned with our mission. So we're in a big learning period where we're trying to bridge sort of the 10 years of working with innovative but still traditional kind of social sector frontline organizations working in communities on issues like the ones I talked about. And now a new wave of folks who are saying, look, technology can influence and change how everything's done. And data can be leveraged, and the data that are being created, and solutions can be more analytical and more personalized and more scalable when technology is at their core. And we're trying to blend these insights and bring sort of the expertise of social problems and solutions that might work offline, and figure out what are at the core of those insights that can be techified, or what are the tech native ideas that can be implemented in ways that they affect real folks' lives. So we're having fun. It's a lot to learn. I think we don't definitely have all the kind of answers, but it's been our practice always to kind of learn by doing. And so when one organization does something that works, we try to capture that practice and apply it to the next ones that come through, and do as best we can not to make the same mistakes over and over. So and then just a little about me, because I know, always on folks' mind is how do I take what I'm doing and apply it. And I will say that my own career path has been very serendipitous and not super planned out. And I've been at one place for a long time now. So I helped start a youth agency in Connecticut when I was in college that worked with young people in public housing. We put college students to live in apartments in public housing developments that were not quite ready for families to be housed there because they weren't meeting code or whatever. But by and then those young people would in turn work with groups of children doing academic social development stuff over the summer and through the after school. So it's like a concentrated, focused on high needs neighborhood, but becoming part of the neighborhood to try and give the counselors a greater sense of what was going on in the neighborhood and community and relationships, and then in turn groom a sort of next generation of leaders who could do that. So the organization is called LEAP. It's still going on. We were in one city, then we grew to 3, then we grew to 5, and now it's back to 1. So, nonprofit sustainability is tough, but they're doing a great job still. And I went to law school thinking, not necessarily that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I believed in social justice and civil rights, and a lot of folks that I admired had gone to law school. So I went to law school and confirmed that I didn't want to be a lawyer, and was trying to think about how to get back to nonprofit management stuff, and came to New York, clerked for a judge, and got introduced to this hedge fund manager who had this concept that more people should be emailing kids, and I've been there ever since. So, a couple of lessons I take from mine. One is the first idea, LEAP, was not an original idea. It was something that we adapted from programs that were in place in Massachusetts. So my first insight was to do social innovation or do things. You don't have to go into a dark closet and come out with something totally original. You can steal good ideas and try to make them better. The other thing was that my co-founder was a lot smarter than I was. He was the founding executive director at LEAP, and he had gone to Yale Law School, which was a big reason I wanted to go there. And so second big lesson for me was just surrounding yourself by people who are smarter than you are, who you can learn from. And then the last thing is, I ended up at Blue Ridge because I got rejected from a bunch of other jobs, kind of applying to be a fellow at this foundation or some other job. And so that's good too. Failure, you can fail up, sort of. I feel like I was trying to get entry-level positions and didn't get them, and ended up being hired to direct Blue Ridge. So I don't know. I hope that's encouraging in some sense. You hang around with smart people and fail, and you'll end up speaking to a cohort studying social innovation. So it's good. So one thing I think is true for us, as it is for most organizations, is there's an aspirational role and then there's an actual role. So aspirationally, what we do is hopefully, so we're making a grant to them that we expect to be about $450,000 over 5 years. This first year grant is $100,000. Next year we expect, unless Jake turns out to be a horribly unethical person, which I highly doubt, it'll be 150, and then 100, and then 75, and then 25. So one piece is just sort of a financial leeway to experiment, but not so much that there's not also the burden or the incentive to raise other money. So the first thing we do is give a little bit of a cushion financially, but then second, try to help them think about where to raise money elsewhere. And in order to raise money, so one piece is money. The second big thing that I'm sure that we'll be focused on with Jake is helping, as we are with all of the folks who are in our portfolio, is clarify what their outcomes are. So there's one school of thought around outcomes is you just need to you need to hit them, you need to demonstrate that you're achieving your impact, and the funding will flow from that. Our view is there's actually a lot of room, particularly with relates to funding, if you are at least clear and intentional about what your impact is, even if you're not necessarily hitting your goals right away. There's some room at the startup stage for that. But what there's not room for are organizations that don't have a clarity of vision about what they're trying to achieve. And so I think in lots of cases we support groups before they've really fully worked that out. They kind of have it, they're pointed at a real problem. They've convinced us that they're smart and can think through problems, and they have a rough outline of a model in place. And so I feel like we have to hold ourselves accountable for helping them get to a place where they can crisply articulate their theory of change, and the metrics that they want to use, at least in the near term, to hold themselves accountable. So that's second thing. There's two other pillars that I think organizations have to be really good at. Like, there's a lot of things organizations have to do, but the two other big pillars are, one is talent. Things are always about the people. It's always about the people. We get asked, like, when you select, why do you select? Is it about the people or the idea? It's always about the people. There's no cookie cutter thing about, like, this is a good person and this is not a good person, but I would say there's, self-awareness and ability to adapt and learn and incorporate information and react to that new information is important. And so that's something we look for, and hopefully the folks come with a sense that, look, they can't do everything, but they have to be clear about what they think they can do well and where they then have to hire. And even in a 2-person, 3-person shop, internal communication about holding, giving each other feedback, positive and negative, and setting culture and all that stuff is really important. So we try to help folks put those practices into place around, you have an official performance review system internally. You are prioritizing the hiring and the role definition and the decision rights and that kind of stuff, even from an early stage. And then the fourth pillar is board. So organizations can do a lot wrong and keep going if they have a great board. And so we try to help them recruit and identify other good people. Jake happens to have an incredible network, particularly in his field. So so that'll make our role easier there. But hopefully we can find other people who can add value in some of the blind spots. So those are the kind of pillars. And then aspirationally, we just add, the aspiration is that we really add value in each of those 4 areas: funding, outcomes, people, and board. And then we can provide other things too, like, people are interested in accounting and these kinds of things. We can draw on the wisdom of the other folks in the portfolio to try and help shorten the learning curve. But those are the things we really want to be good at.
Yeah, just a question about your turn towards technology. I spent a year in college working for Teach for America, and I remember how kind of data-driven it was.
Yeah.
So when you say technology, do you mean companies like that are keeping the data, or do you mean other companies? And kind of what are those examples? I just have a hard time thinking of what you're talking about.
We're talking more about ideas where the idea is itself a platform, or if you took away the internet, it wouldn't exist, kind of a thing. So Khan Academy is a big prototypical adaptive technology around learning. We're supporting a company called Piggy Mojo, which is aimed at helping people save. They do something which they call impulse savings, where when people forego an expense, they can text people within their social group that they just passed on a coffee or whatever. And in turn, through behavioral economics, people say, oh, my spouse or the person in my savings group just saved, I ought to save. And then where it relates to low-income folks is they have a partnership with a stored value card where folks who can't have credit cards but can have stored value cards and typically underbanked. If they text to save, it'll move the money from the stored value card, which is their transactional account, into an online savings account, and start to build like emergency funds, which all kinds of research shows is very related to instability and stuff like that. So even like having $1,000 or $2,000 in the bank can have a meaningful impact. So that's something where it's just like an app, but hopefully is related to a real social solution. We're supporting Code for America, which is based in the Bay Area. We're helping them in New York in 2 ways. One is by supporting a team of fellows. So the core of what Code for America does is like Teach for America. It's inspired by Teach for America, but instead of placing teachers in low-income classrooms, it places geeks into city government, basically. So they looked around and they said, government is itself really a platform, but it's treated. One of their inspirations is a guy named Tim O'Reilly, who's big in tech space, and he said, like, it's like a vending machine. You put your money in and you shake it and you get it out, and you're not that satisfied with the service and that kind of thing. And really what government should be is a platform for citizens to engage with one another and make the world better and that kind of thing. And so they also are very frustrated with the fact that city governments spend billions and billions of dollars on very clunky technology systems that most people think look bad and don't work great. And so they have cities apply to them and say, we want to create technology in this or that department. They put the geeks in who are both engineers and product developers and designers and ethnographers and so forth to develop lightweight apps that then can get reused by municipalities around the country. So they've created a suite of apps that are now spreading across. In New York, they're focused on criminal justice. So they're thinking particularly about the pre-trial detention, where we hold folks without sort of a rational basis for who gets held and who gets released. And it's very expensive to hold folks as opposed to releasing them. And so they're trying to develop sort of weighted predictive analytics to say this person's dangerous, this person's not, based on a history of different things, and put that in place throughout the city. And then they're also organizing civic technologists within the city who are working on all kinds of things, from transportation to urban planning and other things. So that's another example of folks in our portfolio. And DataKind, which you guys know, is trying to figure out how to bring data science to social sector problems. And data science, of course, drives the algorithms of all technology. And there's the data analytics that large and small social sector organizations have to be thinking about. So we believe that DataKind will come up with scalable solutions, probably tech-based, that help give data science and data analytic tools to a broader cross-section of people working on social problems. And we think the rest of our portfolio will benefit from the fact that they have DataKind as a colleague with several hundred data scientists at their fingertips.
Seems like certainly at Stern and here and other schools are really getting on board with teaching a new generation of students these new methodologies, ways of thinking. So how do other foundations and other funding streams sort of like meet people in the middle, and how are they able to adapt to the new methodologies and be ready to provide financial support for all the new kinds of organizations?
Yeah, we have other foundation experts in the room. So, well, first of all, what folks say about foundations is if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. So that's kind of frustrating for folks who are trying to raise money, and it's a classic challenge because it's the transaction costs of applying to each and every funder and giving them what they want, how they want it, and so forth. So the downside is, and then one thing is it's hard to generalize, but the other thing that's sort of often said about foundations is they don't have a lot of pressure put on them externally because there's, they're sitting on a pile of money. People usually don't tell them the truth because they want the money. And it's hard to judge whether they're doing a good job or a bad job because measurement in the social sector is hard, period. And then foundations are only a piece of any individual organization. So it's really hard to extrapolate and say, like, this foundation is doing a great job and that foundation's not, except through the marketing efforts of individual foundations as thought leaders. So all that makes it, like, not very responsive to the market. But so that's all on the negative side. So one answer is, well, there's not a lot of funders who are out there supporting technology and things that might fail and radical experiments and all that kind of stuff. So that's the bad news. I mean, the good news is, for better or for worse, foundations are often chasing like the next new thing. So I think there is a lot of, data is becoming a huge watchword among sort of foundations conversations with each other. I think educational technology, more funders are starting to say, I need to learn more about educational technology. We're supporting, we're supporting education, and that looks shiny. So let me think about educational technology. So, and there is often at least a self-professed understanding that philanthropy can be like the R&D money of social problems. Like, if you said theoretically, then foundations should be able to put money out. There is no market pressure, so if it doesn't work, the consequences aren't that huge. There's lip service paid to that. I think in general, there's also sort of a upswing on the focus on outcomes and measurable outcomes, and foundations want to say they are achieving measurable outcomes, which is counterweight. But so it's mixed. But short answer to all that sort of mixed cross signals is that there will be more money for technology, and I think also generationally, as people take roles as program officers and so forth, they're just going to be thinking and assuming that technology is going to be a part of solutions. So I think there'll be more money made available. The other thing, technology or no technology, there's always money for someone who's thoughtful, deeply versed in a problem with an idea that makes sense. If someone has a very strong, in jargon terms, theory of change, if you can draw throughput between like the problem that they've identified and the solution that they're proposing, if they have credibility because they really understand the problem and they're not just, it's not just theoretical, there's going to be money available for those people.
And do you think within a time frame that, I feel like a lot of startup projects move with a speed and agility that foundations traditionally don't?
That's true.
Grant-making process doesn't move.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think institutional philanthropy is the best place to rely on for, your first year. Usually the best money is sort of friends and family kind of money, or attaching yourself to an existing organization and working on a project under an umbrella of something else and spinning out from there. People are quick to say, I have a great idea, let me go raise philanthropy dollars to do it, and that's usually not the fastest route. Yeah.
Along the same lines, I found one of the challenges of kind of starting a social impact problem is this question between being legally a non-profit or a for-profit.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like, such kind of simple thing, but it's really, for us, it's been a big kind of challenge of how do we define ourselves. Neither of those seem to really fit.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of guide your potential and, your portfolio or other people that come to you about that question?
So we're relatively new to the for-profit stuff. We were around the conversation a lot for a bunch of years, but we haven't really started supporting for-profits. So I can't claim great expertise. I think, though, a couple of things. One is it kind of depends who's going to pay. That's a big early question. If it's a third party going to pay, if it's like you expect someone to pay for someone else to use the service, then often cases, philanthropy is, or government is going to pay, then it's probably better to be a nonprofit. If it's going to be earned, then I think one thought is around, is your market someplace that's more comfortable interacting with nonprofits than for-profits? So, for example, historically in education, people are a little suspicious of for-profit educational operators, more willing to engage a nonprofit. That's probably changing. And then the third thing is just financing, where you can get the money from. So there's an interesting article in Stanford Social Innovation Review within the last couple months where, with all the buzz around like B Corps and LC3s and, all that kind of stuff, more people are assuming they ought to start as for-profits, and there might be some seed money, but it's really hard to sustain those over time. And that, we'll probably see more going out of business. So I think it really depends on the organization, the business model, who's paying, and the context in which it's operating.
So that might be a bit of a fad, are you saying, about, kind of...
That was the point. I hope not. I don't think it's a fad. I don't think it's a fad in the sense that there's hopefully like a more embedded consciousness now about social impact as part of business, right? So the end game is like every business incorporates social, environmental, and in the interim, there's these explicit entities set up to do that. And I think things like B Corp is great because it does try to separate out like the greenwashing from the, folks who are truly embedding those values into their business. What I think that what the danger is at this moment is that there might be a sort of enough angels out there that you can raise $50,000 or $75,000 for a startup social enterprise. But unless you really have the robust sales cycle, unless the money really comes quickly, that money's going to run out. There's not like second-tier funding. Whereas, you might potentially have a longer runway if you are raising philanthropy while also earning money on top of that.
Blue Ridge facilitates partnerships with its grantees.
Yep.
Do you have a good story that kind of illustrates
one
of those, or maybe a success story that kind of came out of one of those partnerships?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so this is something we've always said, and this is also there's some distinction between aspiration and reality, not a ton here, but so we always said, like, look, we'll get this group, folks will facilitate interactions. We had a sense that like nonprofits often start out focused on a very specific problem with a clear like solution to that, and then they realize that social challenges are complex, they're multifaceted. If I'm interested in youth development, I'm focused on like tutoring. Well, my kid's also hungry, so now I got to get into nutrition related stuff or whatever. Basically, you can get creep. And so we said, well, what if we try to facilitate partnerships, and then everyone can do just what they're good at, and then in combination can be more comprehensive and holistic. And I think theoretically that's true, but in reality, they're not all divisions of Blue Ridge, so we can't be like, okay, here's everybody's strategic plan and how you're all going to work together in the places that we think you can work and all that kind of stuff. So really what we ended up doing is facilitating relationship building, because again, a lot of talk about partnership, collaboration, et cetera, in nonprofits, but at the core of it is folks need to trust each other. People who've been down partnerships know like how hard it is, and someone's usually not doing what they're supposed to do, and then they don't want to do partnerships anymore and that kind of thing. So mainly what we do is we just make sure we're connecting people to each other and taking folks out for happy hour and doing all hands meetings and that kind of stuff. But it's everything from like folks have, schools that we've where groups work in, we have multiple services in the same school, or folks have used iMentor as a tool for their other youth organizations, or referred like a kid who gets in trouble in criminal justice to a program that works with kids in criminal justice. So, but it tends to be sort of more informal. We have a bunch of groups who are collectively part of a portfolio funded by the Social Innovation Fund. So that's also a vehicle for us to facilitate collaboration across different organizations.
Do you have some sort of formal or informal like advocacy and government relations piece of what you do if you're working with nonprofits and social businesses that have to interface with government regulation and regulatory bodies?
We don't have a sense where we help them navigate that. I think we do interact a fair amount with different parts of New York City government, particularly Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. And so but the way that's worked is mainly I've like been on like little advisory boards and then tried to make connections, but we don't have a formal like here's how you navigate this channel or that channel. I think there are other organizations that also very much inspire Blue Ridge that do that a lot better than we do. So the Vera Institute of Justice, for example, Vera, V-E-R-A, they create demonstration projects in the criminal justice sphere specifically for government to implement, because their feeling is how you get to scale is you affect government. That's where all the people are and all the money is. So if you can change the way a government department works, then you can have very far-reaching effects. So we've partnered with them on 2 organizations that are their demonstration projects that we've incubated. But we haven't had as an explicit part of our model that for anything that we support on the front end, we already have a relationship with government to test it. So I would like us to be better about that, because I do think in terms of when you think about scale or influence or systems change, and you're trying to draw a connection between how does a small startup do that, it's often through the influence and policy influence or interaction with government that makes that possible. Yeah.
How do you measure the success of Blue Ridge, as you talked about it being hard, and then these relationships that you're fostering, how do you report that out if you were successful or not?
Yeah. So our metrics are basically, there's two buckets. One is effectiveness, which is, well, there's three buckets. The first is effectiveness, how effective are our organizations? And there it's metrics related to each individual organization. The second is sustainability, like if they're effective, we'd like them to continue, and so sort of look at their compound annual growth rate or how many survive. And then there's our operations, which like, are we good about getting back to people and that kind of stuff. We're probably not where we want to be on probably any of them, but the on the effectiveness, we don't roll them up, so we don't say, okay, like how many kids have gone to college as a result of Blue Ridge, because it's because they all have different kind of theories of change with different populations. It's not quite fair to compare, but I'd like us to do more of that. On the compound annual growth rate, I think we're at like 68% during the time that they're in our portfolio. I think we've had about 25 groups, including the ones that are just recent additions. We've had 3 be acquired by other nonprofits, which is an interesting dynamic that I'm very now supportive of, having gone through it a couple of times. And none go out of business, so that's pretty good. And then on operationally, I feel like we spend 85% of our attention trying to be supportive of the groups that but as a result, we're like not very good on being responsive to inquiries and that kind of thing. So, so it's mixed. But I in general, I feel very good sort of about the work that we're doing and the work that the organizations are doing. And
Can I
yeah.
that then, which is if there was like one metric that you wish all foundations that are sort of in your class were measuring, what would that be?
That's a good question. It will probably have something to do with, and there is an effort to do this actually, it will probably have something to do with sort of a customer satisfaction kind of thing, which sounds soft, but like if I think of our class, it's very early stage. So holding organizations accountable to do they achieve the stated impact that they said they were going to have on day one is not appropriate, I don't think, because we want to give them room to be very disciplined on stating what their outcomes are, but room to kind of realize they're not having impact, adjust, fail, that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't be that. I feel like funders ought to hold themselves more accountable to feel like they're successful if their grantees are successful, and feel more heat about that. And so that's what worries me. Like I want our groups to succeed. So I would like to figure out how do you incentivize more funders to feel that kind of pressure. And so there is an effort actually out of, what is it? FSG that does like customer satisfaction, and you get ranked as a grant, as a foundation about how you stack against other folks. We try to ask our grantees, like, are we the first or second most valued funder in the 4 areas that I lined up? Like, and we feel like that kind of offers the right incentives, because if they say, you always have to be worried as a funder how they might say, yeah, you're great, I love it, keep the checks coming kind of thing. But but if we say, are we first or second, that gives them an opportunity to say no because my other funder does this, and that helps us learn like what could we do to be better. So it might be some kind of metric around that.
I was just wondering, like, what the dynamic in the funding space is. If all the foundations always want to be seen as innovative, and they're always looking for the new thing, even if there's something that's working really well, still needs funding. Like, how does that play out?
Yeah. So again, tough to generalize completely across funding, but this is precisely what you're describing is very much an issue. So you talk to like successful social entrepreneurs who've scaled up and multi-million-dollar budgets. What they get often from funders is, well, you're doing fine, so I need to give my money to folks who are either on the brink, they're not doing fine, or they have a new thing, and I'm the foundation, I like new things. And so it's frustrating for people, like, how do you build a stable organization that can grow and attract resources? How can there be a more rational market for public good that attracts dollars to the highest performers if, when you start performing very highly and attracting dollars, you sort of get semi-punished by some institutional funders? So this is a very big dynamic. And there are efforts, within the philanthropic community on this. Again, the inspiration for us is a firm out of Boston called New Profit, which very explicitly talks about being like a mezzanine funder. So when organizations get to a certain level, they try to help them scale. There's something called a growth philanthropy network, which is particularly around like how to help high-performing organizations grow. So there's a big conversation now about like driving more resources to, the best performing entities to scale the most proven solutions. Again, very, anything becomes harder in practice than it sounds like. Yeah, it sounds like naturally. Yeah, the best performer should get the money, and that's how it should go. But it gets complicated when you say, well, who's the best? What's the metric? How do you do comparisons if one group is working with, very hard to serve population and another is, so the comparisons become more difficult. But there's attention being focused on this, and I think again a big trend is going toward more common metrics within fields so that you can do those relative comparisons. And there is an increasing interest in a more rational capital market for nonprofits, I think. Yeah.
Since you said sustainability was one of the things
Yeah.
that you measure,
Yeah.
do you see grant funding as a sustainable source of funding, or what do you expect from your nonprofits?
It depends how big they want to be. So if they want to hover around like $1 million annual operating budget, you can get by with philanthropy and individuals on that. If you want to get much bigger than that, then you're going to have you'll have to have some funding model that's not just institutional philanthropy. So it could be government, it could be high net worth donors, it could be a lot of little donors. But you need some other. Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. And I would just say like your disciplines of like being interdisciplinary thinkers and being empathetic, thinking about data, thinking about design, like these are the waves of the future, and it's at this point now sort of a competitive advantage for nonprofits or for-profits to have that stuff. It's going to shift and be like a requirement. So that's a good thing generally, and sort of your talents and skill sets to make sure that those things combined with being like substantive problem solving is much needed. So anyway, congrats on what you're doing, and it's good to be in touch with all of you now.